Welcome to Identity Unboxed, where we provide mentorship and promote representation for Black professionals in the advancement of the Black community.
We are seeking guidance from exceptional Black leaders, scholars, and professionals with expertise in their respective fields.
We hope to foster a space that promotes authenticity, inclusivity, and restoration for our listeners while exploring the intersection of our personal and professional lives.
This project is a culmination of our lived experiences as young Black professionals to transform our life trajectories to overcome adversity and reach triumph.
Our intention is to inspire you on your path to discovering your purpose.
And recently, according to a study conducted by NPR with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, African Americans in rural and low-income communities are significantly less likely to have been encouraged to apply for college while growing up. And I'd like to know, what changes do you believe that the world of academia could make to become more accessible for African Americans? And what is a piece of advice that you would have given your younger self as you navigated this space?
Yeah, I mean, those statistics are always so heartbreaking, right? And academia can be so hierarchical, right? We assign more worth to people the higher their ranking is. We also assume that only scholars can theorize about scholarly topics, such as language and race. But what I've noticed is our students have astute observations about many things, and making it easier for them to share these experiences can go a long way to making them feel that they have value to add to scholarly inquiry, whether it's in the college classroom or the high school classroom or wherever it is along their sort of academic trajectory. And also, I think thinking about what knowledge production is, and expanding the types of texts that we analyze in the classroom are really important at all levels of education. So, the people I interviewed for Senegal Abroad, they often brought in literature and film and music to make sense of their experiences. And I'm trained in the humanities, and so I'm really interested in how these texts help us understand basically the human condition, right? And so, in various times in data collection, I would just witness these really thought-provoking scenes. One comes to mind when I was just sitting on a stoop in Brooklyn with some college-age participants. And we're talking about all sorts of things, and they start talking about the Senegalese rapper Baby Izzy, who I hadn't heard of. And he has this music video called Home Party. And all of a sudden they start bringing out their phones and they find his, and they're like, this video is so much like Meek Mill's House Party, and we have to show you. And so they get the videos and they're side by side, they're sitting there and they're playing them. And then they are, explaining what is happening linguistically, sociologically, musically. And these aren't trained linguists or sociologists or ethnomusicologists, but they have so much to say. And I'm sitting here and I'm so amused by this sort of Senegalese version of this song. I highly suggest checking it out. It's heavily auto-tuned, so I could barely understand anything, but it's just all the different symbols in the videos, how Baby Izzy is using both Wolof and English. And it was just so much fun to see these young women just provide so much insight. And so there's that. I have other episodes or sort of anecdotes from the data where people are bringing in film, movies. Actually, one of my favorites is when I was in Rome and I'm speaking to these two middle-aged participants. And I'm asking them, okay, what's your experience living here in Rome, right? And one of them asked me, have you seen the film The Color Purple? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, he asked us, and before he says anything else, he quotes a line from it. But he quotes it in French and Italian. And it's one of like in the span of a sentence, he's doing so much with it. So I'm trying to remember exactly what he said. I think it was something like "Je suis nero, je suis brutto, ma je suis vivo," which is basically, you know, I am black, I am ugly, but I'm alive, right? And so he's saying "je suis," I am in French, and then he's using these adjectives in Italian. And I'm just like, wow, you know, like how you're understanding yourself and how others are viewing you. We can read based off of, you know, the language choices that you've made and how you're switching between them. And you're using this cultural production, African American cultural production, right? Taking Alice Walker's novel that they saw in film form and making sense of life. And so, like, people do that. Like, that's how we go through the world and understand ourselves. So I wish as a kid, I wish I had known that the things that interest me and have scholarly value are things that I could dedicate my career to learning more about. You know, so I get to do research on language. I get to do research on music. But I also wish I would have known that I had something valuable to say, even when I was in high school, even when I was in middle school. Right?
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that and explaining how we're constantly making meaning throughout connecting with others. And language is evolving, like you said. And I kind of wanted to switch gears a little bit and kind of dive into more of your diversity, equity, and inclusion work. You recently just took the role as the Associate Dean of Equity, Justice, and Inclusion at the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington. Big congratulations. And I was just hoping to kind of dive into what do you believe is the importance of DEI work in particular among predominantly white institutions such as the UW, and as a Black woman also doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so I'm finishing up my first year in that position, and it's an inaugural position, so it didn't exist in the College of Arts and Sciences before. So it's kind of a monumental task to be like, okay, what is it that I'm going to focus on? Because I could focus on all the things, you know, but then probably not do justice to anything. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. But I took on the position mainly because after having spent my whole life at predominantly white institutions, I know firsthand the alienation, the presumptions of incompetence, the feelings of not belonging, and the undervaluing of minoritized students and faculty and staff, because I've lived it, right? But I also know that there are certain aspects of my identity, for instance, growing up in a lower middle class household, coming from a highly educated family, having access to the best schools, all these things that have made it easier for me than for many others who might look like me, you know. And so because of these privileges, I have a blueprint on how to navigate spaces that have traditionally excluded people like me. And so all of this is to say that I believe anyone can succeed and thrive if they are supported and if they can be themselves. Right. So some people even succeed in spite of the lack of support. But that should not be how things work. Right. We should be making the road as easy to travel as possible. And so I took on this associate deanship because I'm hoping that I can work with colleagues across campus to address systemic and structural issues that impede people from doing their best work. Because when people are doing their best work and they're happy to do it, everyone wins. Right. And I think for minoritized individuals, knowing that there are people in positions of power that share their experiences and that have their back and that are leading with their best interests in mind is important. And that's not to say that I can't stumble and
areas of growth,
but I think having experience with so many people who feel marginalized and predominantly white institutions feel help sort of just like get me thinking about how I can help whomever it is, right? You know, and the reality is higher education was originally designed to be exclusionary, right? You know, I don't know if either of you have read or parts or all of Presumed Incompetent.
I have not, but I will add it to my list.
Yes, please do. So, I mean, it was this edited volume, this collection of essays that came out probably over a decade ago, about women of color in higher education, right? Um, and the introduction of that reminds us that universities were built to serve the interests of wealthy white men, right? Like that's why they're here. So even with some formal barriers being lifted, academic institutions often remain inhospitable places for those who have been excluded, right? Because it's really hard to tear down tradition and to just completely change how we work. So it takes so much work to reimagine these spaces and make them truly supportive of people of all backgrounds. And that also means working to find ways for people to bring their authentic selves. And that work never ends, right?
And I think you really touch on a really important aspect of having a different frame of reference when we are building these systems and instituting policies that disproportionately affect marginalized communities. And I personally relate to the story you share about being at these institutions and kind of feeling that pressure of being the only in a room. And I'm a first generation college graduate, and I also graduated from the UW. And I remember some days I would walk around campus and not see another Black person. It was very isolating, and showing up to lecture halls with hundreds of students and you look around and you're the only one, you know? So it just really highlights how much this work needs to continue to have emphasis put on it and resources allocated to it. And it's just great to hear that you've been able to make those changes that you hope to see.
Well, and it's interesting with UW too, because we're also in a very white city and a very white state, right? And so, you know, I come from Houston, which is one of the most diverse cities in the country. So even though I was going to predominantly white schools, I would see Black people all the time, right? And whenever I go back to visit, I'm always like, oh, we exist.
You're going to the grocery store, you're running into people that you look like, you know?
Yeah.
That's not the case.
Yeah. And that does something, right? You know, and so I think about sort of anti-DEI work that's sweeping the country, especially in the South, especially in my home state. But when you're here in a place like Seattle, which, you know, is purportedly liberal and whatnot, and I'm very grateful that there's not legislation that says that my position can't exist, right? Which is happening in other places. But it's also very tiring to be the only one and to encounter people who are like, well, we're so liberal, so we don't have that much work to do, right? Like, I find that actually harder than when you're in a place where it's like, you know, most people are like, yeah, it's we got a lot of work to do. And so you can do the work. And here you have to convince people that the work has to happen.
And that it's ongoing work too. I think people forget that this is a lifelong journey towards furthering anti-racism. Like there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We're always going to constantly be learning and trying to figure out better ways to implement new policies to support people that look like us.
Absolutely. I mean, anti-racism takes work, right? It's not about not being racist. That doesn't really mean anything, right? It's about actively being anti-racist, and you have to put in the work. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's a big thing these days. And something that I've noticed just in the city of Seattle and in general is a lot of people think that like diversity means just putting people in the position and you like, you know, just meeting a number. And it's like, oh, if we have, you know, some diversity within our staff pool, we did the job. But I think now we're transitioning to a time where we know that that's just the first step of the job. The next step is, you know, cultural competency. It's, you know, getting people to, you know, integrate into the work environment and embracing who they are rather than assimilating to the environments that are already there. It's about true inclusivity. And so it's so like it's just so amazing to see that you are dedicating your life to doing this kind of work, truly, because it's so important. And one thing that we've mentioned in previous filmed episodes is that for many people, like DEI is just, it's what they do, but for us, it's our life because it's a lived experience. And so I would love to hear you elaborate on those points. Plus, who has been an influential person to you in your life and why as you've navigated your DEI journey?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a lived experience. It's not some sort of academic exercise where it's like, oh, I now have all the vocabulary to talk about this eloquently and articulately, and so I'm going to just turn it into that, right? It's about yeah, the messiness of trying to completely reimagine a system, a harmful system. And yeah, it's important work because our lives depend on it, right? Or- yeah, like they really do, right? And when you think of sort of mental health and you think of all these other things and just the toll it takes to show up in these spaces when you might be, tolerated, but you're not really celebrated for who you are is really, really hard. Um, but yeah, to answer your question about who's been influential. I mean, there are so many people and so many ancestors, right? Um, it's it's hard to choose one, but I mean, I'm gonna have to.
Name all.
Yeah, I mean, I
More
could.
than one. If you have
Yeah, I know. There's so many, but I'm gonna give a shout out to my mom, right? Because to witness her transform this tiny private school that I went to when I was a kindergartner, first grade, and she was a teacher at the time. And it was in this like two houses that were side by side. I think there were like 3 bedrooms, right? And so to transform this school into incredible campus. They just had a groundbreaking last November that I went to, which was also her retirement party. And it was yeah, it was
cool.
incredible, while she was head of school. I mean, they added grades, so now they go up to 8th. I think they went to 5th when she took over. Um, it's yeah, it's just what it took, her vision, her expertise, intelligence, courage, her like incomparable work ethic, all the while really focusing on educational equity, right? Because it's also one of the most diverse private schools in Houston. Um, and so making sure students, you know, from all walks of life could access a world-class education. Um, to see how she did that has really shaped the work that I do in my life. So while I mean, I could name so many people. I could name my namesakes, Maya Angelou and Angela Davis, because yes, it's both in my name. I mean, I can name all the other people in my family. I could name my students, right? My students influence me every day, um, because I know what they're going through, and they show up and they do the work. Um, like yeah, there's just so many influences, but I'm gonna go with my mom if I have to choose one.
That's amazing. And I really love that you just talk about how influential so many people have been in your life and they've helped you kind of identify what your goals are and how, you plan to try to affect change in the spaces that you're in. So I really, yeah, just love you sharing that. And it's so important to have those mentors. And that's partly why we created this project for, kind of filling that gap of finding mentors in spaces where we often don't see people that look like us. And you're a mentor to us and will be a mentor to many more people that listen to this episode. And I was hoping to ask you kind of the importance of mentorship to you. I know that's something that you've been really passionate about, and also just combating imposter syndrome in the spaces that you've been into.
Yeah, absolutely. Mentorship, I'm thinking a lot about mentorship because I'm also thinking about how to create pathways towards mentorship in the college, because people need that, right? And it's not just the expertise that people have, it's that human connection, seeing people being able to do it, hearing out how they did it, and there's never one path to getting there. And I've been really fortunate to have amazing mentors in my life, and from many different backgrounds, right? I think, my grad school is really hard. Like and there were times where I almost dropped out. Like,
Wow.
yeah, like I was, after my qualifying exams, I was this close to quitting because it was the worst experience of my life. It was like, I can't even tell you. And, because I had one member on my committee who was just awful, right? Like, he would ask a question, I would answer it. He would say, no, that's wrong, it's this. And he would basically say what I had just said, just slightly differently. And it was so deflating that by the time I got through that portion of the exam, I was just like, I've got nothing left. And I still had half of the exam to go. And after I, got through my exam and I passed, and I think it was mainly off of, like, I had so many meetings with all my professors. And so over the course of that term, I proved that I knew this stuff. But that performance that day, and remember, I told you I hate public speaking. And so that was the height of all the sort of insecurities around public speaking. And I was in therapy at the time to try to work on that. And so it was like, that experience just brought up so many things. And I remember going to who would become my advisor and who was the chair of this committee. And this man, I've got to say, so white man, the most amazing mentor I think I've had, right? Like, he was just like, look, don't listen to that. We know that you know this stuff. And it wasn't as bad as you think it was, right? And we've got you, right? And then, even I was grateful for that, but I was completely deflated, right? And so I actually ended up taking 6 months off. And I decided I'm just going to do the thing that brings me the most joy. And I traveled the world, basically. I went to South and Southeast Asia. I spent 3 months traveling around there. I went to Kenya and worked in a school that was like a sister school to my mom's school in Nairobi. Worked there for a month. I was teaching art and something else. I forget what I was doing there. I then went by bus from Nairobi to Cape Town.
Wow, this is so amazing.
It was incredible. Like, I was doing what I loved. It was so great. And before I left, I told my advisor, I was like, I have to do this. And he was like, I know. Like, he didn't say, oh, this could be, like, this is not good use of your time and you need to, like, he gave me that space. Which I think very few advisors would probably do that. Right. And after the 6 months, I was just like, oh, I love what I do. And I lost sight of that. And so I then booked my ticket to Paris and I spent 3 months there doing data collection. And then I went to Rome and I had all this energy because I had taken that time away. And I came back, I wrote up my dissertation. I had my committee was great. Someone else on my committee, also a great mentor. And, I wrote a dissertation I was really proud of. And from the strength of that dissertation, I was able to get a job here. So my position here in the French and Italian Studies department was the first position I've had, academic position.
So awesome.
Yeah. And it was just like, but for that mentor to know what I needed, and to give me the space to do it was just great. So that's wonderful. And then since getting here, I mean, there's so many incredible people on campus, but especially incredible Black women who are like, this is how you navigate this space.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in it together.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it takes a village. in mentorship, it takes a village too, right? Like you can't find that guru mentor that's going to give you everything.
Yeah.
And so, and also we're overworked, we're overtaxed, right? So
Yeah, everyone feels it too. And the unpaid labor of taking on the mentorship roles, like you want to do it, but you're like, how am I going to have time to help this person and do all my other things that I have to do?
absolutely. So being able to sort of figure out what are the things that you need. So again, that reflexivity is important. It's like at this moment, what is it that you need? How can someone help you with that? Identifying that and then keeping them in manageable chunks, right? So maybe going to someone to say, I just really need to know how to do X, right? And so not saying, hey, can you be my mentor and hold my hand through this thing? But just be like,
6 months or whatever. Yeah.
yeah. Just, can I take you to coffee and pick your brain about this, right? I find very useful. And because I've been so supported in that way, I really do try to make space and time for anyone who needs it. So you are all welcome to reach out to me. Like, hey, I just want to talk about something.
I appreciate it so much.
That's awesome. Tiana, I don't know if you can share yet, but I think you do have some exciting news about your
I do.
internship
I
program.
do have some exciting news that Maya was also a part of. I'm a part of the professional staff organization, DEI committee here at the University of Washington. And Maya wrote an amazing letter of support for a project to mentor BIPOC staff on campus. It's a whole program that we're hoping to roll out this upcoming academic year for about 9 months. So it's in the very, very early stages, but super excited. It was for the Diversity Seed Grant that offered the funding. So looking forward to launching that. And also Maya will probably be asking you questions like throughout that experience too. But it's just amazing. I mean, I'm, a staff member at the UW and 24, I'm early in my career. So, recent grad and just trying to figure out how I can help those people that follow behind me and, get some great advice from professionals as well. So yeah,
I'm so excited that I got funded, and it's a great project and one that's really needed.
Yeah. Hey, well, you've talked about so much, Maya. We really appreciate it. We went way over time, which we always do. So
I cleared my schedule. I know how these things work. So I don't have to run. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to ask them.
We do have one last question, and it is, what does Blackness mean to you? And it's a huge one.
It is. Yeah. Okay. Well, from a theoretical perspective, I'm gonna start there, and then I'll get to
Yes.
I see Blackness just like any racial identity. It's something that society creates and lives out, right? So it's something that can be transformed and that can evolve and can even be destroyed. As Howard Omi and Michael Wyden have argued, they have a book on racial formation, right? And so Blackness is historically and socially constructed, and it's context dependent. So, for instance, in the US, notions of Blackness have emerged from racial ideologies that have linked Blackness to enslavement, servitude, inferiority. And in my own research, I see how Senegalese people who grow up in Senegal are made aware of their Blackness when they arrive in the US or in France or in Italy. And these are all places that have their own historical baggage around race, and which manifests in various ways in the present day. And that's not to say that the people I've interviewed who grew up in Senegal were not aware of their Blackness beforehand. So colonialism, neocolonialism, they all have devastating effects and sort of influence how people understand race. But most of the people that I interviewed did not think about Blackness on a daily basis beforehand. And so their understandings of Blackness evolve when they migrate and must contend with the outside world, constantly reminding them that they are Black. And so for someone like myself, who has grown up with this constant reminder, its meaning is complex, right? So when you live in a society that's addicted to white supremacy, you're taught to see Blackness through a deficit or a deficiency lens. But to me, Blackness is amazing. because it tells a story of unwavering resolve, of moving forward when the world tries to hold you back, of finding joy in hostile terrain, of being unapologetically yourself when others try to convince you that you're not enough. So for me, Blackness is strength, it's courage, it's beauty, it's growth. And it's something that it's part of me. And so I like it for what it is. Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Well, yeah, Maya, that's all we have for you. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we
Um,
didn't cover, or
I'm just so honored that you've invited me and, have allowed me to reflect on who I am, where I come from, where I'm going. So I do hope that my personal experiences and scholarly interests help others make sense of their own. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and keep being you, because you are a beacon of light that students see and look to. So thank you truly for walking in your truth, and being you. I feel like, oftentimes we feel like the impact that we make is insignificant as Black people, especially when navigating predominantly white spaces because we don't feel seen. But I hope you know that so many people see you. So thank you.
Well,
yes,
thank you so
we
much.
appreciate you so much, your time and you sharing your story. You really work so open, and it's going to make an impact on all the people that listen in. So thank you again, Maya.
Thank you so much, Tiana and Brad.
We are so grateful for your support, and thank you for listening to Identity Unboxed.
Authenticity is your guide to cast an impact on the world that you will be proud of. Signing off with pride, Tiana
And Brad.
Thank you so much.